Hello, everybody. I feel like I've got 3 ice cream cones, and I'm trying to decide whether to share them or not. But I will.
Thank you.
Uri Caine, Mario Laginha. My name's Derek Bermel, as some of you undoubtedly know, and others undoubtedly do not. I am the artist in residence here at the Institute for Advanced Study. And that's where you are right now, at the Institute for Advanced Study. Okay, just checking. In case anybody was in the wrong place, I don't want, sometimes people come to the wrong place, takes them an hour, they finally figure out, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm supposed to be at that Richardson Hall or somewhere else, so just so you know, okay. Or they think they're supposed to be at a physics lecture on the other side of the Institute, so you're in Wolfenson Hall. Okay, nobody's getting up to leave, that's good. So people may drift in. This is somewhat informal, but these two wonderful musicians, I don't even know what to call them because they're the type of musician I love. They do everything, and so they're composers, they're performers, creative minds, and very articulate about music and why they do what they do. So it's exciting to have them here to talk a little bit to you, and if you have questions. I just kind of want to start this discussion. The title of this performance tonight is From Two Sides, and the reason that title was actually my better half, the other side, came up with this title, and because Mario's work actually, it was taken from a couple of the pieces that Mario wrote where he talks about the sea from both sides. And suddenly it was interesting to contemplate, actually this concert really is about the sea from both sides. It's about a European view of jazz and the classical tradition and an American view of jazz and classical tradition. But somehow then, when I start talking about jazz and classical, that starts to seem very facile, because actually jazz and classical, their worlds encompass much more than jazz and classical. When you hear Mario play, you hear jazz and classical, of course, but you also hear fado, you also hear chorinho, you also hear Latin music, you hear all the different things that informs his sensibility as a musician, as well as the many different types of classical music and the many different types of jazz that inform his sensibility, as well as all the people he's worked with and the different formations in which he works as a musician. And then when you hear Uri play, you hear boogie woogie, and you hear all kinds of things. I mean, from the sublime to the ridiculous. So that's so to say that it's about two sides is making things a little bit simple, and maybe it's more of a since we're here at the Institute, maybe it's more of an icosahedron, and these are just facets of the icosahedron or something like that. I'm sure there's a mathematician saying no. So where were we? We weren't anywhere. Let's start talking about. Let's let you talk because I'm talking. This program, just to start with Mario, I mean, the program is yours. You have these canções e fugas, meaning songs and fugues, and what was it that kind of got you going on this idea?
Hello. Thing happened that as almost the piano players do, of course, when they study, they go through the preludes and fugues from Bach, and I always thought that the fugue has something that is very catchy. It's very complex, and at the same time, it's fast. It's easy to follow, because if you have a melody and the melody comes with one voice, so you have the theme, and then when the second voice starts with the same melody, and then if there is three voices, then the third voice comes with the same melody, and that's that melody, and so although it can be really complex, it's in a way it's easy to follow, and this I was interested by this idea of mix this complex structure with something that you can follow. So once I thought, okay, I will try to write one. And I did, and in the end, I must say, sorry, I was happy, say, oh, I could, I did it. So I was like a young child, really happy, like, yeah, I did it. So and then I started to think, oh, I would like to do one record. I mean, not like Bach with 12/12 and another 12/12, but at least maybe I thought, okay, 6 songs, and this is easy. I mean, in jazz world, I mean, I write a tune with some space for improvising, so this was easy. So a song, and always followed by a fugue in the same key.
And the song are those songs, the way you've notated them, because they are partially notated. The songs, just you have the head, I mean, which is really written out, and then it just goes off into whatever you just choose to improvise.
I mean, this I wrote a little bit with the same spirit that you write a standard or a song, then has an harmony, and then you improvise in the harmony. Of course, I didn't wrote what I've improvised in the record. It would be a trouble that I had when I was learning jazz. So we all have to let's see this. So, but then the fugues are written because they don't have improvisation. They are as they are.
And what? Sorry, can you guys close the door out there? Could you just close these doors? That would be great. Thanks. So the fugue, though, is a very serious form. I mean, just for those of you, many of you may know the form, but you have a subject, and then you have to write a counter subject as that subject is played again in a different voice, and then maybe it's a 3-voice fugue, maybe it's a 4-voice fugue. A lot of yours are 4, I guess, but some are 3, right? And one of them.
And 1/5.
1 5-voice fugue, and that's also even more. And then you have episodes and these which are patterns that come back. So it's quite rigorous form.
Are related with the theme, with the subject, as you said. So yeah.
And I mean, Uri, your Goldberg you worked with the Goldberg variation, so both of you have this link to Bach. I mean, Uri wrote his own version of his own variations on the Goldberg themes with all kinds of unusual ensembles, which comprise this very large work, which I think can be bought somehow. We don't talk about buying things here because the Institute is.
But I have it. So I have
right, he has it. Right, okay,
it.
right. So, but could you talk about your influence from Bach or how you got going?
Just like Mario, when I was growing up as a young piano student, we had to play Bach, and immediately you start to figure out or try to figure out what are the harmonies, how's it moving around, and then I heard Glenn Gould's recording of the Goldberg Variation when I was about 12, which really was incredible because he was playing with so much rhythmic ferocity, and the voices were so clear, the way he delineates all the different voices. So that's when I really started to study the Goldberg Variations. I sort of looked at it as seeing how Bach is, just like jazz musicians, elaborating a very simple theme, by putting a lot of harmonic substitutions in and also creating many different moods, and in a way trying to sum up a lot of his compositional, things that he enjoyed doing So there's canons at every interval. There's dances. There's different maybe tributes to other composers like Scarlatti that you wouldn't necessarily assume he would be into. There's even combination of 2 drinking songs at the end to make it like a big party. So it's incredible, you're talking about counterpoint fitting, that he actually can fit those 2 voices and yet it still follows the harmony of the Goldberg variations. So my idea was to sort of mirror that. So for every canon, I would write a piece that would also have that as the time signature, the interval. And try to also maybe have tributes to other composers, try to have, in a way, a history of jazz embedded in the variations. Because I was playing with improvisers, I could just give them the changes to the Goldberg variations. And I could get a German choir totally drunk and say, sing the drinking songs, for real.
There are changes to the Goldberg variations. It does have changes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
It's like a 32-bar standard.
Right.
It has 4 8-bar phrases, and they go, they end in the tonic, to the dominant, the relative minor, and then back to the tonics. It's something that you could really use as material to sort of, deal with just the whole concept of variety and the idea of style, what that means in music.
It's funny because these days the word eclectic is tossed around a lot, and I'm sure both of you have been called eclectic at different times. But, Bach was eclectic, Beethoven was eclectic. We often don't realize that through today's hearing, Beethoven sounds like a thing or a style. Oh yeah, that's like Beethoven. You might differentiate late Beethoven and early Beethoven, but you don't, it all sounds kind of similar. And now we're getting to the point where Mahler is, it's kind of in a period. It sounds like we can differentiate that. We can even hear it with Stravinsky. But at the time, they seem to be eclectics to the people around them.
Yeah, I think in a lot of music history, that combination of different things that people didn't think of. If you, talking about Bach, his sons thought of him as sort of an old fogey in a way, if you read their letters. They were more interested in this new classic style that they were dealing with. So that must have been an interesting family dynamic. But in the sense that in a way replicates what happens in music history, that people, the next generation comes along and says it's okay to marry this with that and see what happens. And then it sort of works. And like you're saying, that whole issue recedes as time goes on because we can't really see that Beethoven, especially if you look at a lot of Beethoven's work, like Wellington's Victory, he was pumping it out.
Yeah,
he wanted to do, arrangements of Irish songs to make money. But, that's just the reality.
Hey, we all have our dogs, as one of my teachers, Bill Albright, said. So this notion is not really very new, what you guys are doing, but somehow you've made it new in the particular things you've chosen to bring. You talked about seeing Keith Jarrett, and that the 2 things that really stood out when I heard your music for the first time, which was not that long ago, it was only about a year and a half ago, but we're Keith Jarrett and Bill Evans, and then you told me, these are both heroes of mine.
They were important, yeah.
But neither of them, especially Keith Jarrett, was a really, as you mentioned yesterday, he really separated his classical from his jazz work.
Yeah, when he recorded, he decided in a certain moment of his life to play. Actually, I don't know exactly why. I'm sure that it's written anywhere, but he decided to play classical music and record all these Goldberg variations. Mozart sonatas, I think, and also with flute and piano, a lot of things, Shostakovich preludes and fugues, I think he does it in like, okay, now I'm playing classical, although the way he plays, I think, a lot of influences are there. We cannot say that, and even even he has a fantastic technique, very perfect. Although he can play like this and this, but still I mean, the technique is incredible. He has a very good technique.
Well, you had good technique. I mean, at the conservatory, you had like a perfect score doing classical music as a classical musician, but then you didn't end up.
You know, the thing is, okay, the thing is, if I never wanted to be a classical piano player, never, and actually when I went to the conservatory, it was just because I thought it could help the technique. So in the beginning was quite relaxed, like okay, but then I got also in love with that culture, with that all that music, you know, these great composers. So I thought, okay, I will try to go until the end, and I did. So yeah, I have technique, of course, but I mean there are levels, you know. There are guys that, I mean, like some of Ligeti studies. I mean, I look okay, I will take 1 year to maybe to play one or something.
Well, Ligeti was famous for saying when he was told by Imard, must have been, or somebody who was going to learn. No, I guess it wasn't Imard who first learned that, but the pianist. He said what this one.
A lot of Ligeti works.
Imard, yeah. Well, but I think whoever it was that he wrote for told him that a couple of the etudes were impossible, and he said, yes, the last couple are impossible, but in about 20 years they will be playable. Somebody will be able to play them, you know. And he said that with complete seriousness because he was writing for the future, you know, or trying. But now people play them, you know. I mean, but of course the level is crazy.
Yes,
yeah. How you seem like you have this very classical technique style. I mean,
some Ligeti studies.
you play Ligeti.
No, I studied that, but I mean, I had the same thing that you did. I never really wanted to be a classical pianist, but I was, I guess, lucky in the sense that a lot of older jazz musicians said to me, practice that music, at least try to get something from that music that you can translate into something as an improviser. And then I found the teacher actually that would just give me different examples and say, just learn this page, but check out how your wrist moves. Just learn, you know, 2 pages of this, but then we talk about how to play repeated notes, whatever. She would break down everything into a technical exercise, which in a sense is not very musical, but from another sense it's great because it took the pressure off of having to do it and just really get into it. Of course, once you start to know how to play, like you're saying, you get into the music, and then you really get into the music. You know, it becomes something that you just say, why am I can use this too. And so a lot of these boundaries that other people impose, you don't really have to impose them on yourself.
Yeah, I think you're...
Were your teachers supportive of what you, knowing, I mean, maybe it's interesting because you both say, well, I always knew I was just doing that for the technique or to get deeper into this music or something, but I didn't want to be a concert pianist. I never really wanted to do that. That wasn't the goal. So were your teachers supportive of this? Or?
I mean, for me, I was studying with a jazz pianist, basically, Bernard Pfeiffer.
Right.
So he was much more like a hectoring parent, you know. He would say, you need to check this out. He was a good teacher. And I was like 13 years old, so for me it really focused my mind to have an adult talking to you that way, that specifically.
Did you stop studying, say, when you were 17 or 18? I mean,
no, because he passed away, and then after that I started meeting this technical teacher. Her name was Arminda Canteros. She was from Argentina. I had an older cousin who was a classical pianist, and he went to Juilliard, and he came to my house to practice one summer, and I saw him just practicing obsessively Brahms' Second Piano Concerto. So, I mean, I was a little younger then, and that idea of actually repeating the same thing over and over again, even though I understood the musicality of it, I thought to myself, if I practiced that many hours, I would want to have something else to show for it. And I don't know, I mean, of course, that's not accepted in classical, if you told your classical piano teacher that, but I didn't have that problem. I mean, I had another really good teacher named George Rothberg, who was a composer in Philadelphia. And I met him when I was about 15. And so that was another way into it, because he didn't really sanction jazz in the sense that he wasn't really concerned about it. I wanted to study with him because he was a 12-tone composer, and I was listening to that music. And
But then he had a reawakening or something.
this is a little bit before then.
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
I went through.
Because I've played some of that stuff from the 50s, and said, "Ooh,
I love that stuff.
Ooh."
And he said to me, "I'm not going to teach you that until you have to accept a discipline that I teach in a university, and I can't talk to students that way because they're too old already. Can you submit to that discipline?" And I said, "What is it?" And it's more like every week bring in a Bach chorale, a development section of the Mozart sonata, a Schubert song, Schumann, on and on. Study the example and then try to write it and get into it. Don't do it just as an exercise, but try to be expressive with it. And you're right, he was going through his own thing where he was trying to write tone of music. So that was another thing where he was so attacked for that, and around musicians even that I knew who would go to the concerts and say, this is regressive. I mean, we like the 12-tone music more. So that was, again...
Including you.
No,
Oh,
I
you
was
didn't feel
more ambivalent. I was actually checking out that an older man would change himself that way, and then, in a way, be proud of that. That made a strong impression on me, because a lot of the musicians that I knew, I mean, everybody sort of talked in a sort of a political way about, I'm into this. That's not valid.
Yeah, like being on a team.
Very team-oriented, very almost the jock culture aspect of being a musician, especially more in the jazz world maybe, but that idea of how you're judging and being judged is that's another complicated thing. And then even in contemporary music, that's going on. I mean, certainly in a place like Princeton, they didn't like Rockberg's music at all. So
yeah, now they might. Different era.
It's a different generation.
Yeah.
And maybe people, in a way, I miss Milton Babbitt. I never thought it was that intimidating for somebody to say, who cares if you listen? I totally understand what he's saying, and if 2 people listen, it's okay. It's sort of the way the music is now on the internet, You might have 3 fans, but they love your music, go do it.
3 good fans may be better than 30 kind of half-hearted fans, right?
With my experience in the conservatory, I had 2 teachers. They were okay about but they would say very much like, yeah, okay, but if you can study a little more of this, and then one day, I mean, they would not say, no, you shouldn't do that, but they would try. And one of them said, you can be a good, which is for me really incredible. If you can play well music from other people, why should you play yours? It's something like this in my point of view. But that's what they are telling to me. It's you should play classical, not play jazz or your own music. You can be and I think this is of course a way of it's a conservative way of thinking that still exists a lot, I think, in classical schools, in some of the classical schools.
Uri said something interesting yesterday, which was that jazz players in the U.S., which I would agree with, aren't always that hip to what's going on in Europe, in Asia, in South America. That they're a little bit closed in terms of thinking of that things are happening. What's happening in America right now? I'm sure not everybody, but there are many who are very focused. Do you think that in Europe, but you were saying, but the Europeans are more open to what's going on in America. They're interested in hearing what jazz is going on in America. In terms of classical music, is it the other way around? That I mean, most of my colleagues in America know a lot about what's going on in Europe, in Asia, maybe less in South America, but I've found a lot of Europeans don't know anything about what's going on in America and aren't that interested necessarily. Do you think that's true?
I think they are. Although, I mean, maybe the kind of people that I speak with and maybe they are already a little bit more close to jazz field, and so they look to people like Samuel Barber, Aaron Copland, Charles Ives. I mean, they know that they know Bernstein.
But those are the dead guys. But I'm also thinking about the living folks out there. You know, some of the great living American composers. I would think most of them are not known at all in Europe.
Yeah,
Maybe Steve Reich or somebody like. There's a
Reich
few.
A lot. I mean,
Yeah.
he plays a lot. Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you ask me to now say names, maybe I would be in trouble. But
I was talking more from the classical field,
Yeah,
that
but-
field.
Yeah, no, but I think they look.
They're aware. Hmm.
I'm not, you know, I think what you're saying generally, I agree with that. That a lot of the times when you talk to, or when I've talked to composers from Europe, either they're, and again, this is this game of the politics of, are you more aggressive because you're actually more progressive? So in other words, they're saying we're upholding the standard of Boulez and Stockhausen, and we're young people and we love that music. And Americans usually tend to write entertaining music, or they become tonal and rhythmic to make the audience feel better, so that the audience can say, this is actually modern music, even though it's easy listening compared to a lot of, quote, contemporary music that's based on Boulez and Stockhausen. On the other hand, there's so many young people that are searching for new things, and they're finding them in America, as they've always, is one alternative. But I think that a lot of it is also political. The young people in Finland are not necessarily, they're not anti-American, but they have a lot going on in their own culture, let's say, or young Italian musicians. They're not as obsessed with Americans as we are, thinking that we have this control in many ways, not just in music.
Right.
So I think the only way it really happens is when individuals get together and they start to say, you know, what do you like? Turn me on to this, and then that's the way you learn and progress.
Yep. And I don't know if there's folks out there who have particular questions for these guys, because we could continue on this vein for a while, but you know, I want to open it up to see if anybody has anything burning question that they want to ask. 'Cause if not, I have more burning questions for you guys.
Burn away.
All right. Well, you're holding Mozart here, and you are going to be playing some Mozart tonight in your own way. You started, I don't want to give too much, but you started with the that famous sonata, that C major that everybody's played and was inflicted on them sometimes by teachers, as overzealous teachers. You chose to kind of get that out how did you come about developing, and the other question I have is how do you, even though I didn't finish the first question, how did you start developing it? How do you develop a piece out of an existing work, especially one that is so tried and true and that everybody and their mom and dad has played?
I mean, in a piece like that, especially because it's such a classic sonata form, you can play within that form. Like if you had a standard and you want to improvise within it. So, you have a first section, you sort of play around with that, you make your move to the second. Then in the development section, you can really try to go somewhere else and develop it. But, you have to return. And I'm just sort of following the form, but as it occurs to me to jump around and do different things. I mean, sometimes it's really not just inflecting it in a different way, but other times it's maybe adding a different type of rhythm or counterpoint.
And have you played that particular sonata with other people?
No, but I have arrangements of Mozart for groups, let's say playing like the first movement of the 40th Symphony.
But how do you approach, so when you say an arrangement for a group, are you playing, do you have the chord changes written out? How does that work?
I would do different things. I mean, sometimes it could be we play Mozart and somebody solos over it. Sometimes it could be you actually break it down into a section where there's going to be a group improvisation or two people improvising using a harmony or a free improvisation. Or sometimes you can have something where the group can spontaneously sort of explode where they want to go and then come back to hit Mozart, which you have to practice that a little bit, but I mean, it's a good effect, that of how people are listening to each other. That's what makes it so much fun to play that way, because you have to play Mozart, but you have to be on your toes to make, if somebody makes a jump, then you go.
But is it blasphemy, Uri? No.
I'm sure for some people it is because of the way they revere Mozart. And I understand, I'm not saying this in any facetious way, I understand why people could hate that, because they're saying it's so disrespectful, you of all people, and I understand that. On the other hand, as a jazz musician, part of the culture of jazz is to take texts and existing forms and standards, even the most banal music, and try to transform it through improvisation. So that's what we do. And so if it's a Mozart piece, it's not saying this is a better thing than Mozart, it's saying here's the structure, see what people can do when it's a discipline. It's like listening to any type of music. You have to accept a certain, given in that music. You don't have to accept that, but if musicians decide we're going to agree on this, and then from that we try to create variety. So it's an experiment.
Well, hell, if somebody's improvising things on my music 250 years after my birth, I'll be pretty excited, I would think. I mean, just that would be.
But you might not be happy if you spent 6 months in your room writing a really complicated piece and the clarinet player says, you know what, just leave it to me. I'm going to take a solo.
Give me the head and I'll just go with that. Yeah.
So you got to go both ways there.
Right. I mean, Mario,
sometimes, okay, but this is fine. Sometimes I receive like a mail from somebody that would like to record a tune from me. And it's strange because, and they ask, can I? And for me, they don't have to ask. If they want, they just do it. I think it's something that is really great in music, is this idea that if you write something and people enjoy and want to play your music, is that something better than that? Is great. So it's for me, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I understand where they ask. They are respectful. They want to, but for me, I immediately say, you do whatever you want. I mean, if it, and please don't try. I don't say this, but I think, don't try to play like me. Play like, now it's yours. Do it.
And do you find these? Because what I've gathered from just listening to both of your work and also just talking to you both is that there's something about the rigor that is freeing. So the rigor of writing a fugue, this very kind of complex form, or the limits of using Mahler's themes in your, and following the form of a Mozart sonata actually frees you as a composer to do something else, which seems counterintuitive maybe to folks. Although I suppose if you're following the scientific method, not that people really exactly do that, but it gives people a form also to work within. But how do you view that? Do you find that it frees you to? Did you feel more free or less free writing?
When fortunately I have both sides. I like the idea of writing something that it's written until the last note. It's a good challenge, and I like to have it. So sometimes, but a lot of music I do, sometimes it's even just one melody with chords, with chord changes. So it's a good feeling that sometimes you can choose the direction. I don't feel that I freeze. Even when everything is written, I like to think that one day I can change everything, and I can do it in another way. Actually, yesterday, in the end of the first fugue, I was improvising a little bit. I wanted to. I think it works okay. I shouldn't. The composer accepts.
No, that's right. Yeah, you're only fighting with yourself. It's like a little battle in your head. But what about when you did this beautiful introduction to one of the pieces, which is not on the disc, the fado. And then I thought, oh, he's playing the wrong piece. But he said he was going to play the fado, but now he's playing something else. But no, you were doing this great introduction, which I loved.
Yeah, I mean, I improvised.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
I will do, I hope, another intro today.
Yeah, good. He hopes, right.
Not the same.
Right. Well, I mean, because at one time improvisation was standard in classical music. I mean, players were expected to improvise. In fact, a lot of stuff was just not written down. In the same way that you say, well, I only write this much. You had your figured bass, you had your assumed harmonization of something, or it could be this or this, but basically it was assumed that you could realize that yourself on the pianos or on whatever instrument you were playing, continuo instrument, and so many players were expected to improvise.
I think this is something quite weird about the classical world on the 20th century, because I mean, all the great composers were improvisers. I mean, if this idea that I mean, jazz didn't discover the improvisation, but I mean, jazz make it so strong and so that people now associate the idea of improvisation to jazz. I mean, it makes sense, but improvisation can exist in other music that is not jazz, and all these great composers were great improvisers. So my question is, I have a question. No. I mean, why? I think in a way the classical studies stopped a little bit this idea of improviser, because it was common in like a concerto. The cadenza was improvised by
I'll tell you exactly when it happened. I know exactly the moment that it happened. I can tell you the moment. It was when Beethoven wrote his fourth, I'm going to say, piano concerto, and he said, you don't improvise this cadenza. You play what I wrote. And he wrote it out. And I think that's me. I don't know if that is the moment, but it's certainly a seminal moment when the composer was saying, no, me, not you. This is about me. I'm the composer, and you play the notes that I wrote. And, that was really, of course, things were happening much long before that, and things happened long after that. People still improvised cadenzas after that. But I think it was a moment when, because Beethoven was such an important figure, especially not just as a composer, but also as a kind of inspirational figure, this romantic figure who embodied the nature of making art, and who was, it was all about the passion and the struggle and the individual, triumphing over the world, and so that kind of feeling, the fact that Beethoven did that, somehow I think, and everything after was somehow in Beethoven's shadow, I think did influence classical composers to, more toward where we ended up in the 20th century, which was compositions that people play that sometimes look so complex on the page that they look so like a roadmap, so complicated that you're almost intimidated to do anything, because it's telling you not to be a machine, but pretty close.
I think another influence, though, in stopping the improvisation was the advent of the people that came after Beethoven that purported to teach about Beethoven, and the influence of music school and academicism, and sort of calcification that comes when people say, this is the way it has to be. And there's nobody to challenge them. Somebody says, okay. And so pretty soon, it's a comfort for a pianist to know that they're playing Beethoven's cadenza, because they don't really have to know how to make a cadenza anymore. And that was, when you read about young Beethoven coming to Vienna, it sounds like Charlie Parker coming to New York, and there were cutting sessions. Here's the theme, go. And people were listening, and it was an educated, it's a very, aristocratic audience, but the music lovers in that culture said, wow, this guy is amazing, and they decided to support him. That was a way that you could show your musical brilliance. And I think today, because so many classical musicians are looking to other types of music, maybe it's returning. I mean, there's a certain, it's not such a leap anymore. But whether or not that's being taught, I don't know. If there's a school that teaches how to make a cadenza on a Mozart concerto, we're going to spend 6 months thinking about how to do that. Is there a school like that? I don't know.
I think you're going to be starting it, maybe. Maybe it's the Uri Caine School of...
I don't know if I want to
Caine
start
Conservatory?
it, though. No, because I think in a way the whole point of the cadenza is, this is my statement. I played Mozart, but now here I am. And there was actually sort of a couple weeks ago a controversy with a French pianist who was told to play supposedly Mozart's cadenza. She wanted to play Busoni's cadenza. And of course Busoni wrote a much more dissonant, chromatic cadenza, but that idea that, no, that doesn't fit. It's too jarring to have Mozart for 20 minutes and then all of a sudden some guy comes out and plays like Cecil Taylor, let's say. But to me, actually, that would sound good.
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, of course, then the question is big, well, what about, composing your own cadenza in new pieces? And so that goes to the question of what's the purpose of a cadenza in a
But I think if you're dealing in contemporary music, especially the way it's practiced, where you know the musicians you're writing for, you come to an agreement, and that agreement can be everything from, okay, on this page you guys get to improvise, but here's the notes you have to play. Here, okay, he's going to be taking a solo, you guys have to play the text. You must play it. I'm going to insist on it. Other times, you know what, maybe in this section we try some. So that's the way you can shape it with the group. I mean, to me, you don't do that all the time. Sometimes it is good just to, like you're saying, to write the whole piece and just say, this is it.
It is interesting what becomes a canon, because Charlie Parker, you mentioned Charlie Parker, and of course now we have the Charlie Parker Omnibook, which every young saxophone player, including me when I was learning, sits down and tries to memorize the Charlie Parker Omnibook.
It's a dilemma.
It becomes its own canon.
It's a dilemma, because if the tradition of jazz is innovation, and yet you have all these music schools telling people, you have to know this stuff. And who can argue with that? Of course. Yeah. You should know every Bach cantata. You should know so much that you're just overflowing with music. But the reality is that it doesn't quite work that way. You have to make decisions all the time about what you're pursuing and also trying to get your own work done. So, it's more complicated than that.
I mean, I don't know. I never study in the United States, so I study in Portugal. But I have this feeling that the jazz schools are getting so organized. So, I mean, in a way, they are so good that they are becoming to be, in my opinion, a little bad.
A victim of their own success.
The thing is, like one of the most important things for a piano player, a jazz piano player, I think it's to learn to discover, and not only discover. I mean, the way all the process to go to the piano, and you all this process of discovering the chords, the sounds, and if they immediately tell you this, if you go to a aula, aula, a class. Thank you. Sometimes actually, you go to a class and your teacher So I say, oh, these chords and this sounds like this, and immediately he has all the response. You know, I think he's losing something that is really important, which is the process. So I believe that it can be good if the teachers are really intelligent and don't give, I mean, they are more opening doors and, okay, but now it has to be you.
Yeah, it had to be you. Well, I mean, this is interesting because now, as we move today into this, incredibly technological society, we face these questions, the questions of access. We have so much access to so many things, and not only that, but just when I learned to study, well, back in the day when I was young, and I learned to study when I was learning orchestration. I mean, I did all my orchestration by hand. Taking a Mozart piece, Bach, not Bach, but Mozart, Haydn, Schubert, and taking the piano piece and copying it onto manuscript paper. And I just did everything that way because that was the only way there was to do it. The programs were just starting and they were terrible, especially for orchestra, so I didn't even bother with those. But then there was, at that time when you teach, I've had experiences where I have a very young student who comes in and says, well, I want to orchestrate. I'm writing my orchestra piece, and what can I do to learn orchestration? And I say, well, copy over a piece of orchestra music that you like. So take a page, and this is Penderecki, the composer, told me this, that he learned because they only had the scores for 3 weeks, and they all sat copying the scores out because he was behind the Iron Curtain. They didn't have, and they only had them for 3 weeks, so they sat there copying over Luigi Nono scores by hand because they wanted to know what the music sounded like, and there was no copying machine. Now you have a copy machine, so you go Xerox it, you sit there and wait, and then you take it out. You say, great, now I have the Luigi Nono score, and you put it in your on your shelf. But the difference between that and copying by hand, but people look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them copy 2 pages of Shostakovich by hand. Because you love it, so learn it by copying. Well, what's the best way to learn it? Copy it. But it's seen as a very strange idea when you can just go to the Xerox machine and,
Yeah, it's a little bit the same kind of problem. The same kind of. So you learn in the process. So you shouldn't kill this the way to get there.
Are there any questions quickly before we, yeah?
I wanted to ask about what you guys think about the role of recordings in all of this, like codifying of classical music. I mean, Jarrett, you really noticed the different intro on the bottom last night. And was that because you were familiar with the recording?
Yeah.
Very.
No, I mean, recording is certainly, it's both the savior and the downfall of music, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like the idea of recording. It's okay. Normally, the recording means what it means. It's what you did in that moment. That's why, I mean, the first record I record, it was with a quintet. The first jazz record with my music was with a quintet, and I call it Today. I call it Hoje, which means today. And the idea, and people ask, what do you mean? I said, because I hope I will play different in some time, and so this is what I'm playing now. That's what I think now, that's what I feel now. But it's just this, it's not more than that.
Yeah, I would say that it's fundamental. I mean, sometimes I look at it more as a document that you're sort of saying, okay, like what you're saying, this is the way we sounded today. Other times it's really like a movie. You can really work hard and edit, especially with the type of software that you can have in your laptop where you're just obsessing over things that you can obsess over and trying it in different ways. either making electronic music that way or even editing something that has elements of classical music with, it's such a flexible way to work that it's, I think that it's important to try to develop that. But sometimes after you do that for a long time, you just want to break out of that and just have it be the document of the time, because that's the way you're playing spontaneously. I think another aspect of that is that in the old days, you could actually make money from recordings. Now when you record something, it's instantly copied and it's out there. For some reason, maybe it's not important that people are doing that, but I mean, the musicians put a lot of work into their music, and then it's just, in a way, stolen from them. It's sort of, but I know a lot of people think, my children, the music should be free, It's like, what's the problem with that? So I know that actually now many musicians depend on playing. That's the thing that they still can steal, I guess, which is just people coming to hear somebody play. So it's sort of a weird reversal.
Yeah. Well, certainly recording has changed audience expectations for what they're going to hear live. Certainly pop music suffers from that. And there are those artists who really have a very different live show than their recording show, and their live show is not meant to sound like a recording, and that's probably the more successful solution, because if you make people expect that they're going to hear what's on the recording, they're almost bound to be disappointed live somehow. But it is a big question, because certainly the stereo has replaced the piano or whatever, the guitar, maybe in the home. If it's Iberia, maybe it's the guitar. Has replaced has that in the home, and as far as music making. So people aren't making music as much as they're kind of making music by putting on their headphones or putting on this, stereo. And in a way that makes the audience a little farther from the process, and maybe makes our process more mystical, I suppose, in some ways, but also farther away somehow, maybe less relevant. Any other question? Because I'm going to let them get ready here, but we'll take one more. Yeah? Well, you're the one from Philadelphia. You don't like to. You never say Philly. I noticed that. You say Philly.
No,
you do?
No,
okay.
Sure.
Okay.
But Philly.
Okay. All right. See, you said it with that look. So, okay.
I don't think Curtis had. I actually went to Curtis last year with Ralph Alessi, who's a trumpet player, and they told us that was the first improvisation workshop they had ever had there. And it was interesting because, in a way, the teachers were in the room and the students were sort of always looking over at the teachers to see, is it okay? Until a very young student got behind the organ and he went crazy. And the teachers were like, oh my God, No, we said, this is good. Let him play. Let him do his thing and see what happens. So they sort of retreated. I think Curtis it'll open up, because the students enjoy that. But in a way, it's a very conservative school. It was always known for that. As Philadelphians, I think they were still having teas on Wednesday that the students had to go to meet the...
Wow. So they need a little more cheesesteak in there with the...
The kids are there. I don't know if the teachers are.
Right. Interesting. Well, thank you all for attending this warm-up event. And thanks for being here on this very cold night. And hopefully we'll heat the place up for you with some music, right, guys? Okay.